G'day, I'm Owen, and you've joined this week's edition of the Pub Test, where we are continuing our Jack the Ripper suspect series, and we have an absolute cracker this week. We're looking at the case of Jacob Leby. Who was he, and how does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, Jacob was born to Joseph and Caroline Levy in Aldgate. Now, we will be talking about another Joseph Levy fairly extensively in this one, but it is a different Joseph Levy to Jacob's father. But we can see that the name Levy being derived from the Hebrew name Levi, and we've got Jacob's, we've got Joseph's. So we can see that they were of Jewish descent, though not necessarily immigrants like so many we have spoken about, but part of the existing Jewish community that was already there. Now, Joseph Levy, being Jacob's father, was a butcher, and Jacob followed his father into that profession. Now, we don't know a great detail about this bloke's life, except a couple of very significant events. One, he was married to Sarah. They had a couple of children. She also was a butcher, and so when Jacob wasn't around for various reasons, as we'll discuss, she took on the role of running the business. In 1886, he got arrested for stealing meat from another butcher, and he's sentenced to 12 months in prison. Yet, he doesn't go to prison. They send him to an asylum. Why? Because his mental health had started to rapidly deteriorate. He had contracted a communicable disease. It would be suggested that he picked that up from some of these women that he may have been frequenting at the night time. And we'll get back to that later. But Sarah herself said if this bloke is not restrained, he is going to do some terrible things because he is starting to lose it. It's reported that Jacob himself also made that claim that he's having these feelings, thoughts that he can't control, things that would go against his conscience, and he needs to be held back from doing them. Sarah also made the claim because of his unstableness that he almost ruined their business. But he gets back out. It's listed in 1888 that he is working again as a butcher. Now, that butcher's shop was right in Mitre Square, or in Butcher's Row. And so there was a whole string of butchers in this area, but it was also in the area where the Whitechapel crimes happened. And obviously, as a butcher, he had skills to be able to perform the crimes. Now, there's some interesting detail here that we will get into, but his mental health went downhill even more so around 1890, where he's put back into the asylum and he dies of mania, as they said, paralysis from this mania in 1891. And I came across a very interesting little detail here, which sort of blows my mind a little bit. Because this type of communicable disease they did not have treatments for back then, but they were trying to treat it by giving people mercury. Obviously not a great treatment plan. It's probably causing more harm than good, but that's how they treated these diseases, which is quite scary when we think about it. So maybe even this mercury was knocking these people over quicker than the mania, as they called it, but who would know? So how does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, many people would say he fits the exact profile. So here's a bloke who maybe had some dalliances with these women of the night, contracted a disease from so said women, developed a hatred as well as a mental deficiency, and so then could not help himself but had to take his vengeance out on them. Not only that, he was skilled with knives. He knew the area well. His wife said that he was known to walk the streets of a night time. In fact, a police officer, without identifying this bloke, said that there was a bit of a strange character, very shady, accosting women, and he followed them and followed him back down to where he worked at a butcher shop. So it ticks all the boxes. Yet, and he has been on this list for quite some time. And here's a little interesting bit of trivia to do with Jacob Leby. There's a video game made by a Ukrainian publishing company called Sherlock Holmes versus Jack the Ripper. Now, apparently, it'd take a bit of a role of Sherlock Holmes and try and work out who Jack the Ripper was, so it sends you back to that area in Whitechapel, and you're walking those streets and having interactions with all these kids and people, and you're trying to work out who committed the crimes. And there's 3 main suspects listed in that video game, which is Francis Tumblety, Walter Sickert, and Jacob Leby. Now, I won't spoil it if you haven't played the game who Jack the Ripper turns out to be in that video game. But of 3 suspects, he is high on that list. It is quite interesting from that point of view. But is there an actual connection other than this circumstantial evidence? Because he wasn't the only butcher in the area. No doubt, as we've seen, there were plenty of people with this disease who had mental issues at the time, who were in and out of asylums, who also had the knowledge of the streets, had the knife ability, the knifemanship, we would say. Well, there is one particular victim that we will look at which does raise some serious questions. And that was Catherine Eddowes. There were 3 eyewitnesses that saw who they believe was Catherine Eddowes and Jack the Ripper about 10 minutes before she was found. And there's another detail in this that needs to be considered as well. So let's look at that instance. What happened on the night when Catherine Eddowes lost her life in Whitechapel? Well, on the night when Catherine Eddowes was murdered, 3 blokes just happened to be standing around talking. 2 of the people's name was Joseph. Joseph Levy, and another bloke named Joseph, and another guy, Harry Harris. Yes, I know, the names were quite interesting back then, like Hyams, where we have a Harry Harris. But they say that they saw a man and a woman, and the woman looked very much like Catherine Eddowes, talking, and then they disappeared. Now, this is of note. For some reason, Harry Harris is not called to the inquest later when they're investigating this, but both the Josephs are. Yes, Joseph Levy is called to the inquest. Now, this is not Joseph Levy, which is Jacob's father, but we don't know for sure if there was a family connection. If this Joseph was a cousin, but he was a butcher, and he did work in Butcher's Row. So there's no doubt in any way, shape, or form that Joseph Levy would not have recognized Jacob if he was that person talking. Now, this is where people suggest that the police make the claim that these Jews wouldn't tell on other Jews. And in fact, the paper stated of Joseph Levy that he was being very aloof about the situation. He knew something, but was not willing to give up the information. So that is quite interesting here. Except, and this little bit of information confuses me a bit. You see, both the Josephs gave differing opinions on what they saw. Joseph Levy said he saw the woman was about 5 foot, which is exactly what Catherine Eddowes was, and the bloke he saw was about 5'3". The other Joseph said he thought the guy was more between 5'8" and 5'9". And that would have meant this guy was towering, the person he saw was towering over Catherine Eddowes. So how could two guys seeing the same two people get the descriptions so wrong? And if Joseph Levy was trying to protect his mate or his cousin, or at least someone that he liked, why did he not go along with the other Joseph and say, yeah, this bloke was about 5'8", 5'9", because Jacob Leby was exactly 5'3"? So he matched the description that Joseph Levy gave. So I don't quite see why he would give that height and then try and be all aloof about it, like, I really didn't know what was going on. That night, Joseph Levy did say, hey, I'm not hanging around here. I don't like this. I'm out. And he took off. Some suggest he was very concerned for his safety because it was a rough place to be, particularly late at night. Others say that he just wanted to get away because he recognized the guy. And what if Jacob Leby was Jack the Ripper? Well, I would suggest here, because Joseph does not appear to have been in any major strife with the law at all, that why would he not hand him in? Now, I don't know. And Joseph Levy lived out his life, lived until about the 1910, 1912 roughly, and never ever came out and said anything even after Jacob had passed away. So I'm myself unsure if what he saw was Jacob Leby. There is another connection to Kaminsky, which I won't deep dive into, but some people suggest maybe he recognized a different person and it wasn't Jacob Leby, because he did have business dealings with someone of the last name Kaminsky, and we've covered him in this series already and other people associated with that. But that's a story for another time. But there was another thing that happened on the night of Catherine Eddowes' murder, and that was the writing on the wall, where it's scrawled in terrible handwriting, but the Jews don't get blamed for anything. Now, it was done in chalk, and the police got rid of it real quick. They rubbed it away. They didn't want it up there. Now, the reason why they didn't want it up there is because this racial tension was starting to build, and people were very on edge to do with this Jack the Ripper subject. So if there was a connection where they could pin a particular group of people with this crime, well, that could have created such a social upheaval, maybe violence in the streets. And so the police were very quick to try and quell that. They didn't want that to be an issue for them. But now we would say, why, if Jacob Leby was of Jewish descent, would he say that? Well, someone looked at this and actually said, you know what, his mental cognitive function was starting to drastically decline in 1888. Remembering it wasn't too long before he's now taken away permanently, and it's not only a couple of years later he dies of this mania. So he was in a fast decline mentally. So was he actually saying something else? And that has been suggested, that rather than why aren't the Jews blamed for everything or anything, he may have been effectively saying, look, I'm a Jew and I get accused of everything, but I'm getting blamed for nothing. In that, look at the crimes I'm doing and no one's pinning it on me. And that is an interesting take on that. And this person too took it a step further by suggesting, because this is an issue that I've raised myself in this series, that someone with this mania wouldn't be able to do these crimes because they were calculated and they were getting away with them. Whereas these people who were just like hacking and slashing surely wouldn't have had the ability to perform them. Yet this person says that's not exactly true. People with this particular type of mania are for a while able to be calculating, be very cold, and then cover up what they're doing and hide these episodes, we could say, from the majority of people. But people who are very close to you would start seeing your mental decline. And we do note that Jacob's wife, Sarah, did identify the fact that this guy was starting to lose it. And again, the police, without naming Jacob, say that they were watching someone who worked in Butcher's Row, who then ended up in an asylum, and then the Ripper crimes stopped. So yes, there is a very, very strong case for, as we've stated, he fits so much of the profile, yet some of the profile he doesn't. People suggest that this type of criminal would not have been able to be married and carry on a normal family life, which he did to an extent despite his episodes. But he was married, had quite a few children. And people say that doesn't fit the Ripper profile, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't have been him, because these profiles aren't 100%, are they? The other thing is the length of time between the Mary Kelly murder and it was 18 months later when he was fully committed into the asylum. The suggestion there is, well, he could have just been laying low because the police presence and notice on him, like he was investigated. So it's not like a Charles Cross situation that the police just didn't really consider him, that he was investigated. So maybe that pulled him back and he was locked up before he could go out and commit more crimes. So was he the Ripper? Well, we got for's and against both ways. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this particular subject. That does bring us an end to this week's episode of the Pub Test. Do the usuals, like, subscribe. I'm Owen, you've been watching the Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.